Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
OK/X/, I'm gonna post a little horror thriller story. It's about 5,000 words, so if you're in the mood to sit and read for a bit, come on in. The dialogue is a little clunky, but the story is good. Let's go.
Fall had begun. Mountains loomed cool and imposing in the late morning light, surrounding the wide forested valley in their heavy shadow. The air was crisp and clean, and trees had exploded in their traditional riot of reds and oranges. Even the sunlight seemed new and refreshed by the change in season. Driving along a road girded closely by huge trees, a young family wound their way through the silent forest. Chatting and bickering in turns, but in high spirits, they made for the distant goal of their family cabin. Somewhere below the cheerfully colored boughs, a monster feasted on a man's corpse, muttering to itself between mouthfuls. "Yum yum, lucky dis he, always lucky me, ha ha. Oh yes, oh yum yum, yes, he." A twig cracked in the bushes and the creature's head swiveled up on a bony neck, revealing its strange but very human-like face, pale white and crimson around the mouth from its dinner. "What's it then? Yum yum, what's this hey?" The monster croaked to itself, a handful of torn meat halfway to his mouth. "Nuffin sorta he. Only a scabby cub, you say? Yum yum, bugger off he." The beast hurled a gory chunk of gristle and bone vaguely at the bushes in the direction of the noise. "Heh, lucky me, yes," crowed the monster again, turning back to the feast. There was a departing rustle in the undergrowth as the fiend attended muttering, smacking and slavering to its gruesome meal. Kelly and Mike were in a good mood. The kids were getting along fairly well. They were out experiencing nature's majesty, as Mike insisted on calling it, and they were ready to enjoy one last vacation before the snows came down. They had been driving for several hours now, and Mike yawned, scratching at the irritated skin on his neck where he had just got a tattoo of his family's names: Kelly, Katie, and Sam. In the back seat, Kelly looked fondly down on her children, Katie and Sam, as they dozed against the sun-warmed windows. They both already seemed so big. She and Mike had married young and conceived even younger, so while they were only entering their mid-20s, Katie was already 7, and Sam had just turned 5. In the front seat, her husband Mike drove and chatted with his best friend Pete, a big soldier who talked as loud as most men shouted. Kelly was surprised the kids could sleep through it. Pete was on temporary leave from the military and had enthusiastically agreed to accompany the family on holiday. "So, Mike," boomed Pete, "why is it that your family cabin is 100 miles from the ass end of nowhere?" Mike chuckled. "My granddad built it himself years ago, and frankly, he was a weird old dude." "Yeah?" prompted his friend. "Oh, you bet," Mike continued. "Didn't like people, my granddad. Built his cabin, never went into town, dug a well, and trapped his own food. A real hermit, you know?" "Sounds like a fun guy." "He really wasn't," admitted Mike. "But at least we get it all to ourselves, and we're almost there anyway." "Whatever you say, Kenny. Hey, pull over, will you? I have to take a leak." Kelly laughed as Mike edged the car over to the side of the road and stopped. It was an old joke calling Mike Kenny or Ken after the doll. Pete had one day decided to nickname the couple after Barbie and Ken because, as he was fond of explaining, that girl is a blonde dream and Mike has no balls. She liked the joke. After 2 kids, Kelly enjoyed the comparison to the supermodel doll. Mike and Pete got out, and little Sam, waking up, piped sleepily that he had to go too. The boys went off to relieve themselves while Kelly and Katie waited. The little girl pulled out one of her coloring books and began inexpertly coloring what Kelly judged to be the pinkest lion that anyone had ever seen. The kids certainly loved her pink, Kelly mused as she looked out the window at the huge trunks growing thickly beneath masses of orange leaves. They had parked just beside a massive and ancient-looking tree that jutted out a little further than the rest. It was cracked down the middle and blackened from an old lightning strike. Kelly thought she could see an eagle's nest wedged up in the high dead branches. She opened the car door to the cool smell of a mountain air, then stepped out, closing the door behind her, and walked several steps to stretch her legs. A quick movement on the other side of the road made the woman pause. For a moment, Kelly thought she could make out a pale, hunching form, as it disappeared into the deep ferns at the side of the road. Instinctively, she looked back at the car to make sure the door was closed and saw Katie still happily filling every picture in with pink marker. Probably just a fat old raccoon or something, she thought, but called out somewhat nervously, "Mike, is that you? Pete?" The sun was still well up in the sky, but down amongst the trunks and ferns the shadows lay thick and heavy. Suddenly, a figure loomed out of the undergrowth right next to her, causing Kelly to spin around with a squeak of surprise, nearly hitting Mike in the face. When she saw it was him, Kelly scowled and punched him in the shoulder. "You scared me, ass," she accused. Then the surprise fading continued more playfully, brandishing her hands karate style. "I could have killed you." Mike stared at her a moment, then laughed. "Lucky me you're not armed, eh?" Kelly always liked his laugh. She came in for a kiss just as Pete returned with Sam, who held a small snake in both hands. Pete let out a loud wolf whistle and thundered good-naturedly, "Get a room, you two. There are children present." Kelly stuck out her tongue at him, then gave Mike another quick kiss before pulling away and snapping into mom mode. "Sam, put that thing down. Your hands are going to stink," she said, gingerly disengaging the smelly reptile from her son's grasp. "Pete, why'd you let him pick it up? And Mike, hun, how did you tear your shirt like that going to the bathroom? You boys are essentially clueless, aren't you?" Kelly went on, hustling her son back to the car. The men followed, grinning, and everyone piled back into the vehicle. Mike said his back was bothering him, so Pete took the wheel, and they drove on down the tree-lined road. A few yellow leaves tumbled across the highway as a white figure crept stealthily from its hiding place in the ferns and, giving the air a sniff, set off down the road after the car. The late afternoon sunlight bathed the valley in soft, honey-colored light, which filtered down through the garish leaves as the car pulled up to the old cabin, giving the overall impression of a being inside a huge circus tent. The group disembarked from the vehicle, stretching their legs after the long drive, and began to unpack the car. Sam and Katie took off up the short path to the cabin, squealing with childish glee at being free after their long imprisonment. Kelly gathered a few bags and followed her children more slowly up to the old front porch. The kids ran around the side of the building, burning off some of the pent-up energy accumulated over the journey. "Don't wander out of sight of the house," Kelly warned as she continued into the cabin. She dumped the bags inside the door and began to remove the dust covers on the furniture as Mike and Pete entered, hauling the remainder of the luggage. "Looks good, Mike," Pete exclaimed loudly as he took in the cabin's interior. "And you say your granddad built it himself, eh? Pretty nice." "Yes, mostly," replied Mike. "He had some friends to help a bit. I mean, look at the size of the place." "I thought you said that he didn't like people," Pete inquired. "Oh well," explained Mike. "The old man may not have liked people very much, but everyone can use a few friends when they're building a house." "True enough," laughed Pete. "Anyway, I'm starving. Hey Kelly, when's dinner?" "What am I, your personal chef?" Kelly asked with mock irritation. "Oh fine, if you really want supper, you'll have to go get some water from the well. Mike will show you where it is. And bring the kids in, will you, hun?" "Sure thing, hun," Mike answered and turned to go. The men left and Kelly began to finish the unpacking and clean the small kitchen a little in preparation for the meal. The days had been growing shorter, and so when Pete and Mike returned with the water, the light was already beginning to fail, and Kelly was starting to feel that low-grade anxiety common to mothers. "Geez, guys," Kelly exclaimed. "What took you two so long, and where are Sam and Katie?" "Sorry about that, Kelly," Pete explained. "Kenny here wanted to show me the scenery, so we walked all around the place before we got to the well. It's a really nice up here, actually," he went on. Her slight anxiety fading, Kelly was inclined to be charitable towards their lateness. "Well, I can't argue with you there, Pete," Kelly agreed. "This place is beautiful in the fall, and Mike, honey, would you call the kids in?" Mike opened the door and barked, "Kids, come in. Your mother wants you." Katie and Sam soon trooped up the stairs to the porch and entered, red-cheeked from play and the crisp air, into the cabin. Mike shut the door behind them, but paused for a moment, looking out the window, and mumbled something under his breath. "What's wrong, hun?" Kelly asked him. "Nothing, dear. I just thought I saw something." "It was nothing, though," he repeated. "Well, come on and help me get dinner started," Kelly said, giving him a light kiss on the cheek. They left to start the meal, and Pete kept the kids entertained while the food was prepared, with funny stories told at high volume. Not long after, the family set into their meal. Laughter and warm yellow light streamed out into the darkness that now surrounded the cabin. In some bushes just out of reach of the light, a hunched form peered at the people inside. It had only had a bite to eat that day and was hungry. It had heard the children playing earlier and intended to snatch one, but the father had appeared with the large one, making the situation too risky. The creature continued to stare in at the oblivious people as they ate and licked its pallid lips in anticipation. After dinner, Pete stepped outside for a smoke while Kelly put the kids to bed. "Come on, Katie, Sam, time for bed," she said as she herded her children to their room. The boy and girl were both worn out from the long day of travel, so there was only weak protest. Kelly returned to the kitchen and began doing the washing up from the meal. She was just drying the long kitchen knife when she felt eyes on her, which sent a tingle up her spine. She glanced around quickly but saw that it was only Mike returning from the bathroom. "Mike, you creeper, why are you staring at me?" she joked. "Can't a man stare at his beautiful wife when he wants?" Mike laughed, coming closer. She always liked his laugh. "Well, if you really have to, I suppose." Kelly smiled back and moved in for a kiss. "Just stop looming around all over the place, will you?" "Sure thing, beautiful," Mike replied as he went to embrace her. "But put down that knife, will you? I'd like to kiss my wife without losing an eye, if that's all right with you." Kelly giggled and set down the knife as the two shared a warm kiss. Just then, they heard Pete outside bellowing, "Jesus Christ, Mike!" There was the sound of a brief scuffle, and Pete burst into the house, breathing heavily and pale as a sheet. His eyes snapped to Mike and then back to the door in confusion. "Pete, what's wrong?" Kelly exclaimed. "What happened?" I don't know, Kelly. I saw..." Pete stammered, still staring at Mike. "Saw what?" prompted Mike. "I saw you. You were out there and..." The big soldier was uncharacteristically shaken, and Kelly led him to the couch and sat him down while Mike locked the door. "What are you talking about, Pete? Mike was in here with me," explained Kelly carefully, afraid Pete might be having some sort of breakdown. "I was outside smoking," Pete explained. "When I see Mike walk up, I figured he'd stepped out for a moment, but I hadn't heard the door. Then I noticed that his clothes were wrong. They were all torn up and dirty." Pete was taking deep breaths and his eyes were still fixed on Mike. He seemed to be willing himself to calm down, then went on. "I barely had time to register that when he hit me with a tree branch." Kelly and Mike looked at Pete in disbelief, then shared a confused glance before turning back to their friend. "Are you sure?" Kelly began. "Of course I'm bloody sure," shouted Pete. "It was Mike. He hit me and I went down, and then he was on top of me. He was fast and strong too, and he tried to bite my throat. He nearly had me, but I managed to break his hold and then his nose." The man was gesturing wildly as he described the scene. Kelly knew that Pete was one of the best hand-to-hand fighters in his squad, so whoever had attacked him must indeed have been very powerful to take him down like that. The big soldier seemed, if not to be calming down, then at least to be getting control of himself. "He ran off into the woods. Mike, we have to go out there and look for him. We can't let him wander around out there to attack again." Kelly was starting to feel panicky and clutched Mike's arm. "Mike, don't go out there," she pleaded. "This isn't right. There's something weird going on. Let's all just stay in here until morning, okay?" The desperation was evident in her voice, but Mike gently disengaged her hands from his arm and stood up. "Pete's right, sweetheart," he said. "We can't just leave some maniac running around out there." And when this didn't seem to convince her, added, "Think of the kids. We have to make sure they're safe." Tears welled up in Kelly's eyes, but she nodded and went to get Sam and Katie while Mike and Pete prepared to leave. She returned with the sleepy and confused children as the men were arming themselves. There were 2 hunting rifles, and Pete took one, but Mike refused the other. "We should leave one behind for you in case it comes back while we're gone," he explained to Kelly. "But you know I don't know how to use it very well, Mike," his wife protested. "Never mind that," Pete interjected. "He won't know that." The matter settled, Mike armed himself instead with an iron fire poker, and they each grabbed a flashlight. "Be careful," Kelly pleaded, giving Mike a worried kiss. "I don't need to be careful," Mike tried to reassure his wife. "I'm always lucky, me." he said with a wink. "Just be careful," she repeated, and gave Pete a quick hug before closing and locking the door behind them. She returned to the now frightened children and sat with them on the couch facing the door. She tried to soothe them, but they could tell that Kelly was afraid, and they whimpered a little as she rocked them gently, rifle lying across her knees. The men had been gone for about 10 minutes when Kelly heard steps coming across the porch and then saw the door handle jiggle as someone outside tried to open it. "Mike?" she called out tremulously. "It's me, darling," Mike's voice answered back. Kelly rose to go to the door when something made her pause. She couldn't remember Mike ever calling her darling. Her stomach clenched in fear. "Where did we meet?" she tested. "There's no time for this," Mike replied harshly. "There's a monster out here." "Where did we meet?" Kelly asked again, more shrilly this time, raising the rifle. There was a growl from outside and something hit the door hard. "I've got a gun, so," Kelly began, but the door was hit a second time, breaking the old lock and sending the door smashing against the wall. Kelly screamed and fired the rifle wildly at Mike as he burst into the room. The bullet grazed the creature's shoulder. Kelly prepared to fire again, but Katie grabbed her arm, causing the second bullet to go wide of the target. "Mommy, no!" the little girl screamed. The child only saw her mother shooting at her father and was understandably confused. Kelly tried to shake her daughter off in desperate frustration, but it was too late. The thing that looked like her husband sprang across the room and landed on top of the woman, bearing her down. Kelly's head smacked sharply against the hardwood floor, dazing her, and the rifle clattered across the room. She tried desperately to push the creature off of her, but it was far too strong. Sam and Katie were screaming. "Get back!" Kelly commanded her children, even as tears of fright filled her eyes. "Run!" The monster was easily overpowering her and dipped its head towards Kelly's neck as if to bite. It was surreal. The face that was so dear to her was contorted in a feral snarl. Kelly was in shock as her husband's mouth opened and prepared to rip a chunk out of her vulnerable throat. Just then, the thing gave a shriek and twisted away from her, clutching at the knife protruding from its back. Little Sam had run to the kitchen and, grabbing the long knife, had plunged it into the monster's exposed back, but the boy was only 5 and the blow was not enough to stop the creature's attack. It viciously backhanded the little boy who was flung across the room, causing Kelly to give a shriek of fear for her child. The creature pulled the knife from its back and, forgetting the woman in its rage, stalked over to Sam's prone figure. It was raising the blade to strike when Mike appeared in the broken doorway. "Kelly, I lost Pete. I don't—" Mike stopped as he took in the scene. Katie was trying to help his wife off the floor as his doppelganger stood over Sam with a knife. The two Mikes locked eyes, frozen for a moment in some kind of bizarre recognition. Kelly broke the trance. "Mike, don't just stand there, help!" she screamed. Mike paused for an instant before throwing himself at the creature, causing it to drop the knife as he bore it to the ground. The two rolled away from each other and Kelly watched, paralyzed by shock as they rose, circling one another in a parody of a wrestling match. The creature made the first move and leapt at Mike, who locked arms with it. The adrenaline must have been surging in his veins because, with an animalistic growl, Mike managed to push the monster back, sending a wild haymaker crashing into its jaw. Kelly finally managed to break her paralysis and grabbed the fallen rifle off the ground as the doppelganger reeled back. Mike stepped forward to press his advantage, but his foot slipped on a broken piece of the door jamb and he fell flat on his back. Blood dripping from its wounded mouth, the monster snatched up the knife and darted towards the fallen man. Blade leading, the creature landed on top of Mike, plunging the weapon into his shoulder. Mike howled in pain as the force of the blow sent the blade all the way through his body, pinning him to the floor. With a scream, half of terror and half of rage, Kelly ran forward and struck the creature wildly with the stock of the rifle. Snarling, the doppelganger seemed to ignore the blows raining down on it and snatched the gun, twisting it out of Kelly's grasp and flinging it aside. He struck the woman hard across the face, sending her sprawling to the ground in front of the broken door. Wasting no time, the monster leapt on top of the woman and closed its hands around her throat. Kelly could feel the terrible grip tighten on her neck. She felt a crackle as her bones nearly broke from the intense pressure. The snarls of the monster and her family's screams faded as she began to lapse into unconsciousness. The crack of the rifle filled the room, and the back of the doppelganger's head exploded outward in a shower of gore. As it fell, what was left of its face seemed to run and bubble. When it hit the ground, it was no longer Mike's face, but a pale, bony creature with a high forehead and jutting jaw. Pete loomed in the ruined doorway. The big soldier was bleeding from a wound on his head and was swaying slightly, but in his eyes there was only rage. "Kelly, are you all right?" he asked, helping the dazed woman to her feet. "I'm fine, She started confusedly. With a grunt, Mike wrenched the knife out of his shoulder and sat up. "Mike!" Kelly cried. "Are you all right? Oh my God, Sam!" She rushed over to where Katie knelt by Sam. Her son was still lying on the ground where he had fallen. To her relief, the little boy had opened his eyes and was moaning a bit. Pete helped Mike up, and the whole group sat for a moment, huddled on the couch just trying to come to grips with the evening's terrifying events. After a minute, the shock and adrenaline faded enough for them to remember that several of them were wounded. "Oh, Mike," Kelly exclaimed. "Your poor shoulder. We have to get that bandaged up, and Pete, your head." "Nothing to worry about, Kelly," Pete replied. "I'll bandage up Kenny before he loses any more blood. We can deal with my head in a minute." Pete hauled the dead creature to the door of the cabin and tossed it outside. "Good enough for now," he said, and went back inside to bandage Mike's wound. The kids were still a little weepy as Pete patched up their father. Kelly comforted them as best she could, even though she was feeling a little hysterical herself. After a while, the children fell asleep on either side of her, and everyone had calmed down enough to start sorting things out. "So," Kelly began in a low voice so as not to wake the children, "are we going to talk about what happened tonight?" "I don't know how much there is to talk about, Kelly," Pete responded. "That thing, whatever it was, somehow managed to look like your husband, and it nearly killed us all." He shuddered. It was like a damned horror film. The other two nodded. At this point, it didn't seem like they could say much more about the whole thing. They had filled Pete in on what had happened inside the cabin, and there were still many questions, but none with answers. They sat quietly for a minute, and then Kelly asked, "What happened out there anyway? How did you two get split up?" "Good question, Mike," Pete prompted. Mike explained that he had seen the monster and gone rushing after it, and later couldn't find Pete and had returned to the cabin. "It was stupid, I guess," Mike admitted when he was finished. "But I just lost my head." "He did too," supplied Pete. "I hear him yell, and he takes off into the woods like a bat out of hell. I went after him, but I couldn't see him. I guess that monster got the drop on me, 'cause next thing I know, something hits me in the back of the head." He paused, rubbing the bandages on his head, then continued. "When I woke up, I heard screaming coming from the cabin, so headed back here as fast as I could, and you know the rest." Pete gestured towards the porch where he had thrown the creature's body. "Well, I'm glad you came back when you did," Kelly told him. "You saved my life, all our lives." "Ah, well," Pete said, blushing a little. "You're welcome, of course, but it sounds like your husband did a bunch of saving himself." Kelly beamed and gave Mike a squeeze, causing him to wince. "He was amazing, Pete. That thing was so strong, but he nearly knocked it on its butt." Mike smiled bashfully. "You do what you've got to do," he explained simply. They continued to talk for a little while longer before they began to drift off to sleep, even though the danger had passed. None of them felt like separating to go sleep in their rooms, so they all slept in a dog pile on the couch for the remainder of the night. The vacation was understandably cut short, and they left the next morning after Pete had buried the monster's body. As a group, they had decided not to bring the matter to the attention of the police. At best, they would be thought liars or crazy, and at worst, they might be charged with homicide. Mike could barely move the arm that had been stabbed, so Pete once again took over the driving. They didn't talk much on the drive home. Sam and Katie were getting over the terror quickly in the way particular to young children and the adults were lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived back at home, Kelly invited Pete to stay over a while since he was still on leave anyway. Pete accepted, and they spent a relaxing week just unwinding and putting the nightmare at the cabin behind them. Mike's arm was still in a sling when Pete said his goodbyes and left to return to duty. Kelly and Mike gave him warm farewells, even closer as friends now, since their harrowing experience. It had been 2 weeks since Pete left, and Mike's arm seemed to be just about back to normal. He smiled to himself as he tested it. He finally felt his old strength in it again. The children were at school, and by the sounds of it, Kelly was just finishing up her shower. Now would be a good time, he decided. Climbing the stairs to the bedroom, he found Kelly pulling on a tank top. "Kelly, sweetheart," he called. "Come out here, will you? I want to show you something." The woman came out of her room smiling, wondering what surprise her husband had waiting for her. "What is it, hon?" She glanced around, looking for Mike. "Did you get me a present?" Her question was cut short as something slammed into her chest, knocking the wind out of her and making her vision go fuzzy. Kelly tried to scream, but a strong hand gripped her by the neck and slammed her backwards into the wall. It lifted her, struggling and kicking off her feet. Her vision swam back into focus, and to her shock she saw Mike, his face twisted and horrifying, grinning at her with malicious glee. "Good," Kelly gurgled, trying to speak, but the doppelganger's grip was too tight. She tried to gouge at the thing's eyes, but it grabbed her wrists with its free hand and yanked her arms back down, nearly wrenching them from their sockets. There was a snap as something gave way in her neck, and the creature brought its face close to the woman's. "Yum yum. Lucky me, huh? Tasty one here, yes," the monster chattered. Then it laughed. As her vision began to go dark, Kelly thought muzzily, "I always liked your laugh." The doppelganger moved its grip to hold her by the hair, exposing her neck. It opened its mouth wide, and with a hot spray of blood, it plunged its teeth deep into the young woman's soft throat, tearing out a great bleeding chunk of it. The creature continued to eat its grisly meal, yammering to itself every so often as it considered its position. "This is a good one, oh yes! Yum yum! Plenty more where she come from, eh?" the monster reflected as it ate. The city would make a nice home for him. There were so many people that he could freely move from house to house, changing his form as often as he needed to. "Heh, never gonna be hungry again, yes," it cackled. "Lucky me, heh? Yum yum." The doppelganger put a foot on the dead woman's chest, and with a wet, crunching pop, wrenched off one of her arms then. Munching happily, it walked down the stairs. It had been rough going, eating only human food while his arm healed, and the beast was glad to have the taste of human on his lips again. It was a shame about the cub's death, since there were too few of them as it was, but the beast concluded that it could not have been avoided. "Heh, his own fault, yes. Runty cub attacking a father, heh, shoulda go find his own food, yes." Still contentedly tearing off chunks of the dead woman's flesh, the doppelganger settled itself comfortably on the floor and waited for the children to come home. Somewhere up in the woods, under the long shadow of the mountains, a huge old tree stood by the road, jutting out from the rest of the forest. It was split down the middle and blackened by a lightning strike, and there was an old eagle's nest wedged up in the high branches. Not far from the tree, a little further into the woods, lay what remained of a man's body. Most of the soft flesh and guts had been cleaned away by scavengers. Some orange leaves released their hold on a branch and spiraled gently to the ground, leaving a gap where the sun could penetrate the canopy. A single ray fell onto the dead man's neck, illuminating a patch of skin on which the names Kelly, Katie, and Sam were still visible.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.